I'm super happy to have Edd Stockdale also here today in this question and answer session. Today on YouTube, Facebook, and LinkedIn. So very shortly about our guest. Edd Stockdale has over a decade of experience in scientific and technical diving. He's the coordinator of the Finnish Scientific Diving Academy at the University of Helsinki, which is an institution founded to enhance scientific diving training and innovate data collection methods in cold water science. When he's not engaged in research diving, Edd enjoys exploring mines and wrecks in the Nordic region or planning his next water adventure. So thanks, Edd, for being here. As I said, this is a question and answer format, so we would be super happy to get some of the audience's questions. You can just comment them and then we will bring them up. We have also already collected some backup questions, and we would already start with the first one, which is, Edd, what made you decide to transition from academic research to full-time diving?
Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming to listen to me chat about what I do for living and basically life. So yeah, but basically, I actually started the other way. I was a diver first, then I went into academia. I started an academic sort of pathway with undergrad all through to starting postgraduate research degrees. And during that sort of transition period, for various reasons, I ended up going back to diving more and more and more to sort of downtime. I was doing a little bit of it for my PhD work. But then I sort of dropped out. I took a small break and I went to go work in diving, and that ended up being a full-time sort of opening. I ended up living the lifestyle dive bomb life basically for a year or two, and then I got bored of that very fast. And I decided actually I wanted to go back into science, but I found a different pathway. Pretty much, I'm much better as a facilitator than I am as an academic sort of dedicated researcher. I'm not a very good academic sort of personality. I get too jittery sitting down still for too long, and I want to go and do things. And I kind of at that period decided I'm going to combine these two. I'm going to take diving and advanced diving and scientific diving and developing further scientific capabilities, put them together and try and go with that. And that's sort of where I had this goal sort of 10, 15 years ago, and I've managed to do it, which is quite satisfying.
Yeah, nice. Can you tell us how you managed to do that? Because it's quite, I mean, not everyone was able or is able to go this path, right? So maybe you could give us some insights.
Stubbornness. No. I had some lucky opportunities, and I met some very, very good people along the way. I ended up working in, I think one of the key sort of pivotal moments in the whole thing was I ended up in Indonesia working for a research station in the Banda Sea, Wakatobi region. And I started seeing like ways of changing and making the science, the data gathering much more efficient. I ended up being the dive safety officer for this station for 3 seasons. And through that process, I met a lot of people. At the same time, I was developing my technical career quite rapidly and trying to link the two more and more, trying to become a better diver, trying to use sort of standardized processes. And then by doing that, being able to get better data faster, which is the principle of scientific diving in a nutshell. And then stepping along the way and just being willing to be involved in different projects, but also coming up with ways to find funding to run sort of more smaller projects, getting involved with larger groups. At the same time, also still publishing, still working in the sort of semi-academic realm and staying in it. So I think anyone that wants to end up in that career pathway has to be quite dedicated. And it's about meeting people. It's not about how fast you can become an amazing technical diver. It's about how solidly along the way, and not just your diving skills. You have to have all the other components that are related to it. You have to have the ability to manage all the land logistics. You have to have the scientific qualifications. I'm not saying you have to have a PhD, but you have to have an understanding of the scientific process, and be prepared basically just to do anything to be involved with research expeditions. And eventually it will happen. Something will come along. Part of it's luck, part of it's hard work. Mostly it's hard work, and living out of a backpack, which most of us that work in this field know about so well. So, or 4 Pelly cases, as the case is these days.
Yeah. So congratulations for that. It's a nice path, at least for me. It sounds nice. You just said, I wanted to become a better diver. What is a better diver for you?
This is where I get flamed by the audience. Buoyancy, propulsion, task loading, and mindset awareness. Those sort of components. So your core diving skills that are required, because you need to be able to sit still. You need to be able to handle and have a higher capacity to manage complex task loading. And the more complex the scientific task you're doing, the more task loading you have, which means the more core abilities. You have to basically be able to do your diving without thinking about it, so you can focus on the other work, as it were. And this is not a specific scientific diving pathway. I mean, this is a core part of diving that should be the way it is. So we actually instill that in our training programs at the Finnish Scientific Diving Academy. Is the first week of the scientific diving course is pretty much a foundational diving program. It's about buoyancy, trim, propulsion, communication, awareness, and the students really enjoy it. I think most of the time, once they get through the week, and they understand afterwards how important it is. Because if you don't have those skills, you can't even start doing the science, and there's no point in going and sampling like core sediments or doing an ecological survey or modeling a wreck if you are then kneeling on it, kicking it with your fins as once you've passed, and it doesn't make sense. So
yeah, what you say makes sense. And what skills or qualities next to that do you think are essential for someone that is pursuing a career in scientific diving? So we have stubbornness, but we also have the diving skills. Is there something else?
It really depends on what area of scientific, because scientific diving it's not so much of a career pathway that's very set. I mean, you can be a research academic that uses diving for their work. They obviously, that is a different skill set to someone like myself, who works as an educator and a facilitator, which is different to someone that works as a dedicated dive safety officer, for example. The dive safety officer person has to be good at legislation. They have to have a much broader understanding of the health and safety aspects and really good at risk mitigation. My role, I have to have all that as well because of my background, but I also have to have an academic understanding of what the tasks are at hand. It really depends on which route you're going, because you could be a scientific diver contributing to a biological project in the shallows in the Caribbean, or you could be doing deep wrecks in the Baltic, or you could be doing polar work, and all of those require different skills. Flexibility and a willingness to learn, I think, is a key component there. And communication, I think, is the ability to actually communicate with your teammates and have that interactive skill, because you can't do this alone. You have to work with people, and to make it work more efficiently, you have to have good communication pathways.
Yeah, communication is so important. And also, I imagine you told before that you were now on a research expedition. I imagine that being in such an expedition also requires really, really good communication skills and teamwork. So what would you say are some other challenges that you face during such research expeditions?
I mean, the biggest thing with most diving-based expedition, like research expeditions, is they all start. They're very exciting. Everyone really is excited to be part of them. If they're not, then they probably should be in that field. I think the communication pathways within the team is very important, because otherwise, if you're stuck together in a remote place and you can't get on, you can't communicate issues, that's already a starting problem. Followed on from that, you then have tiredness and fatigue, because the whole diving process is not just the diving, there's everything around it. In original podcast that was the pre cursor to this I was talking about how the scientific dive operational day works, that it's not just the dive, it's everything around it as well. And if you're on a remoter expedition, you've also got to do all the day-to-day chores as well, so people get tired, and then the communication pathways, when you're getting tired, start breaking down. Complacency also starts kicking in, and you need to have an environment where people have the ability to go, "Oh, you've forgotten to do this," not a blame culture that this is a problem, but just to support each other. So you have to have a very, very good culture within the team, and that's the starting point, because if you don't have that, your team is not going to be efficient, and then it's going to break down.
Is this also something that you, in your education at the Finnish Scientific Diving Academy, also teach? Or is it something that just comes?
No, it's definitely, we integrated it very fast on the first courses that we did. And I'm not going to say we're leading the way, but we are one of the organizations that is definitely trying to integrate this into our training right from the word get-go. So the students that attend the programs, they have to do some pre-learning courses they're established for this. Then they have lectures, and they have reading material related to it. We have a couple of books from some different authors that are very relevant to the field. And then we bring it in right at the start, and they kind of get it to start with. But by the end of the program, you can just see how it's ingrained into their system. And the thing is, from there, I know a lot of the people, especially the Finnish students that have moved to work for other institutes. The people that run those institutes are saying that this is a key skill that's being introduced that they didn't have at the same level. So sort of the human factor, the non-technical skill component of the training is very vital. And I've been lucky that the people that I've had involved as instructors with our program also are very, very knowledgeable and trained in those areas as well. And that's sort of one of the selections that we do. And it also applies to when I run teams like research teams. We discuss it beforehand. If people haven't done the training, they can get the training as part of coming as something I think is very important and vital. So to working operationally in this way.
You just mentioned the human factor. Could you tell us about this human factor concept?
I mean, the human factors concept is not. It's an entire field of ergonomics and human behavior. I think in the diving world, it's quite commonly known from the human diver and Gareth Locke. He's been pushing it very heavily. I work very closely with Gareth. So the online pre-learning course is one of his essentials classes that I have for the students. We then offer his higher end programs. I try and get him or one of his instructors to come across to Finland when we have enough people to run one of the classes. And then we also have so the human factors component itself is just basically how people interact, improving safety through people's cultural behavior within the workplace, but also how communication and teamwork, so skills that are just part of not human nature, but human behavior that we can change and manipulate to improve the working team and the dynamics of the organization. And I mean, you can do entire lecture, like seminar series on this, goes on and on and on. So if anyone's really interested, they can always contact me or contact Gareth directly if they're interested in that area. But we think it's vital to our education process, and we've written various articles on this as well, and we're trying to really integrate it into the standard mentality of scientific diving. And it's not just me. There are organizations in the US, there's some in There's one instructor in the Middle East that's doing it. There's people in Australia, all over the world, that are trying to integrate it more and more. And I think it's a good direction to be in.
Another publication of yours, which is kind of old, but still, I think, very important and crucial, is from 2016, where you write about rebreather, use of rebreather even in shallow scientific dives, and how much more efficient it can be to run scientific dives on rebreather. So could you tell us about or describe the significance, from your opinion, from your point of view, of using rebreathers in ecological research? What are the pros? What are the cons?
Yeah, I mean, rebreathers as a tool for scientific diving they're becoming more and more standardized. Like people are using them more. They're becoming, well, not standardized, they're becoming more accepted. We're very limited by regulation in various parts of the world on the use of rebreathers in scientific diving. Luckily, in Finland, we don't have a limitation on that, but in other countries in Europe, like it's hit or miss whether you can. But there's more of a push, and there's a newer generation of scientific dive professionals, whether they're academics or dive safety officers, that are starting to think about this. Mm-hmm. Benefits of rebreathers they're huge. They make logistics easier for gas and filling times. They increase safety at depth because you're not gas limited. So the gas safety of not having to rely on open circuit and running out of gas. If you have an incident, you've got much more time. You're much safer. They're warmer because of the way that the loop works. They don't make any noise, which has a direct influence if you're doing anything that swims. And there are papers. Steve Linfield put out an excellent paper, I think in 2013, 2014, and there are other ones as well, that show fish surveys with rebreather and fish surveys with open circuit. And I mean, there's a factor of 10 difference in some cases because the fish just move away and you don't even see them because they've gone before the bubblers turn up, and then the non-bubblers get to see them. The benefit in the shallow region is that you're not limited by that gas resource again. So the paper that I think you're referring to is the one I was a co-author with Dominic Andrade Brown and a few other researchers at the time. And it's Dom and I that basically did most of the work that's featured in that paper. Mm-hmm. And we basically managed to do what we were showing with that paper is that we could do a 40-meter to shallows survey series of replicates of transect lines, and doing fish and benthic survey. And the way that the rebreather works for decompression and the way we had an extended gas resource, in 3-hour dive, we managed to complete the entire site. So 40, 35, 30, all the way up, every 5 meters up to 5, like the 5-meter mark from 40 to 5. Mm-hmm. We basically did the calculations on the restrictions by our rules at that time. And if we'd done it on open circuit, it would have taken a week. And also it would have taken an extra, we based it on the compressor literage fill, but that we were using, it would have been, I think, 14 hours of filling gas as well on top of the dives. So by doing that, we managed in 1 week to do 7 sites rather than in 1 week doing 1 site. So there's advantages there and disadvantages. The downsides of it are they require more training. They cost a lot of money, as anyone that's got into rebreather diving knows. The management of rebreather operations for scientific diving is different because of the nature of the rebreathers. You have to have different considerations for how you're going to monitor a site with a site supervisor. For example, you can't see bubbles very easily, so you don't really know where your team is moving around. You can't communicate as easily in some cases. And just if they have an incident, how to respond to the incident is going to be slightly different to if you have an open circuit person. So, I mean, to address that, actually, I created a course at the FSDA, the Finnish Scientific Diving Academy, that is dedicated to rebreather scientific diving training. So the aim of it was to take people that are already scientific dive trained that have then gone out and got rebreather certification and then build the experience together, or people that have no scientific dive training but want to do a scientific dive course but predominantly do their work on rebreathers, which in the Baltic region is quite common, for especially the wrecks and the archaeological work. So we run that, and it's actually a European scientific diver level qualification. So it's the meets the levels of standards of the European scientific diving as an occupational course. So that's been a sort of, the reason I did that was for all the reasons I mentioned. There's benefits of the rebreathers, but at the same time, there's no real training structure. So people are like, I've done my scientific diver course on a single tank, and now I've bought a rebreather, and now I'm going to put them two together, and I'm going to go diving. And it just adds more training, gives people more options.
Yeah, would you, so if you would have like a young scientific diver that is starting his career, and he tells you or she tells you, so I'm open circuit trained, I don't have much money at the moment because I'm young and I'm just like starting my career, but I'm considering putting my money into buying a rebreather and getting that rebreather training or getting more experience on the open circuit. What would you suggest this person?
Depends on what that person's goals and research question is driven. You know, if they're going to be working on wrecks or reefs that are 60, 80 meters, then obviously the answer is going to be different to someone that is really working in the sort of 10, 15 meter range or 5 to 10 meter range and just wants the rebreather because they're cool. So as with all scientific based projects, it should start with a research question driven methodology, not a I want a fancy toy driven methodology. So having that tool in your toolbox eventually, very beneficial. But driving your research because you want that tool is wrong. That's not the way you should be approaching it. So to answer your question sort of very succinctly is that it depends on the person's role and what they're going to be doing with it and where their goals are with it.
And if that person would be interested in shallow dives, like science work in shallow reefs, what would you say? Because still, it makes sense to go on a rebreather in that case.
It does in some cases. Again, I mean, that survey that we were doing was 40 to the shallows, and we were doing it as a comparative, but it was part of a deep mesophonic project. So we were also doing 40 down to 100. So it just meant that we could knock off those things. It also really is dependent on the facilities you're using, the legislation, the restrictions of use of rebreathers in your country, or where you're working, the country or location that you're going to be doing the research in, whether you have other people that are also trained to do it, how much time you're going to spend on a rebreather, because it needs much more time than if you're using open circuit. You've got to maintain the skills. So if you're only going to do it and you're only going to do like 2 weeks of survey a year, it's not much point. You might as well, if you need rebreathers, you bring in a specialized team and get them to do it. If you're trying to develop a career in it and down the track, but if you are someone that you want to use that rebreather for yourself in your own time, and you're a really dedicated diver that's really excited by it, then that's a different question as well. You know, again, that's sort of gaining that experience separately, so that maybe in the future, once you've got that experience, then the research questions can actually be used because you have the ability to answer them. So there's no like straight black or white answer. It really depends on the situation, the location, the research that's actually driving it, and the other logistical factors related to it. So
thank you very much. That's actually a very nice and beautiful and exciting answer. Another question that we have is, which advancements in the diving technology, other than, for example, rebreather, you find most exciting, and how do you see them impacting the future of marine research?
Oh, that's a very tricky question. We're in an exciting time in ocean research. for good and bad reasons. Bad reasons, obviously, because we're starting to have huge impacts with the changing climate and the changing temperatures, the mass bleaching events, etc. But we need to address and study those. To do that, we have to do the science, and to do that, we have to have the technology to be able to do it. But there's a lot of very interesting stuff happening in various places, and the use of different technologies. And I think more importantly than just specific technology is the integration of technologies together. So subs are becoming more and more common, like scientific-based subs, not pleasure yacht, cruise ship like submarines, but scientific-based, dedicated scientific subs. There's the very exciting project that's happening in the UK, which is the Deep R&D. Their habitats their goals to put habitats underwater that people can live in and work out of for extended periods. That would be, that's a way in the future, but it's a very exciting, driven thought. The integration of robotics and diving, I think, is something that's quite exciting. I had a conversation with a very, very senior person at Woods Hole a few months ago about this, where we was asking a question in a general sort of forum, and then we got chatting, and then we took it private and chatted about it, which was whether ROVs and AUVs are going to supersede divers or not. And actually, I don't think they are. I think they're really good to work in tandem. Because the places that you can't put a robot, right in front of the research station I work in is a classic example. You can't put an AUV out there very easily because there's lots of rocks and everything in the water. The ultrasonic positioning system goes crazy and it gets lost. The same with autonomous, like other autonomous robots and things like that. Then ROVs have got umbilical cords and tricky stuff there, but they can be used very, very powerfully in combination with a dive team. So last year I was in Tenerife on a project doing sampling for part of the ocean census, Micronesia expedition, and we had subs and divers working parallel. And then the dive team actually had for a few of them, we had just a little ROV that we were using to do initial scouts, because we were down at mesophotic depth. So we'd throw the ROV in, zoom it down, have a look around and go, actually, this place looks like what we're looking for. It looks like the habitat we're looking for. Pull up the ROV, throw the divers in.
Okay. So as initial survey.
Yeah, so just a quick check. Yeah. It's safer than throwing two divers down and then they have to do a rapid bounce, come up, go, yeah, this is where we're going to go, and takes less time, costs a lot less. Doesn't put two divers at increased risk, or three divers depending on the team. And then we were running parallel to the submarine, which is then taking where we stop and keeps going further. I love working. I've never been inside a sub. I've already worked outside subs, and as the scientists in the sub waves, and then they head off and go up to the surface, and you still got 3 hours of decompression to do. It's like, but this integration of technologies is really exciting, because we can expand what we want to do with questions, and it's not limited at the moment to the technologies we have. It's as those technologies develop as well. There's loads and loads of interesting underwater systems that are being developed for all sorts of sampling, sensory, data collection. I could go on. That's an entire another subject away from what we're talking about this evening. But yeah, I think it's an exciting time, this integration of these different technologies with divers and with each other as well, and to try and break this paradigm of the ROV people just do ROVs, the AUV people just do AUVs, the sub people just do subs, the divers just do diving. If we actually integrate the skills and the ability, we increase the capacity, but also the quality of the data we can gather.
Very complimentary. Nice. I have a question, like a personal question about photogrammetry, and where do you see it most effectively used, like in terms of which research questions can be answered in marine ecological research questions, obviously, with photogrammetry, and in your day-to-day work, when do you use actually photogrammetry?
I'm not a photogrammetry expert by far. I dabble with it. I use it a little bit. I rely on my colleagues that are experts on that. In terms of ecological work, we were trying some stuff with a research at the station, but it hasn't worked. We're still playing around with it a little bit. We've used it for like mussel beds to try and get like an image and things, but in the Baltic it's quite hard because in the shallows especially we've got quite low visibility a lot of the time. Makes the imaging harder. Things move quite a lot, which means that you can't align. There are some really powerful projects though that are using it for biological work. The National Park Service in Florida were doing the work with Brett Seymour and Evan Kovacs. Were doing scans of coral reefs there in the Keys and then geopositioning them. There's guys in Triton in Oban up in Scotland who are doing it underneath fish farms, but they're using ROVs to do the photogrammetry, and they're doing geopositioning for geolocating the images, and then they're doing comparatives with temporal changes. That sort of tool is really, really powerful if it works. So it depends on the environment. I mean, obviously the rec based and the archaeological based use of photogrammetry is huge, especially in the recent years. It's just gone as processing power and cameras and divers' knowledge of it all gets better. Then it's increasing at a rate beyond what an IT ignoramus like me is capable of keeping up with, basically. So that's why I let my colleagues deal with that side of it. I can go and get the images, but I let them do the processing. So I can't really answer that. There's a lot of papers out there. Actually, one of the students I'm supervising at the moment is writing her thesis on the use of photogrammetry in biological work. So when
I find it very interesting.
Submits that, it might be I might have some more stuff out there on it.
You just mentioned wrecks, and I have a question to this one. If you could elaborate on the importance of exploring undived wrecks, so unknown wrecks or wrecks that are just never someone has been there before or just very rarely, not like touristic wrecks, and what kind of information they can reveal.
You're good at the broad questions tonight, whoever's asking these. Yeah, so undived wrecks or rarely dived wrecks are snapshots in time. So this is actually less of my professional role and more just my general interest role with what I do. I'm lucky enough to be part of a wreck exploration documentation team in Finland called Bard of Honor, and we are it's not just us. There's loads of, well, not loads. There's people doing this all over. Is to go down and find these, and to start with is just to discover and identify what it is, so we can put it into the registry of what it may be and identify it. Then there's depending on how old it is, it can tell you like historical components of what was going on at that time, like what's in the hold, how it's sunk, if it's a war wreck or whether it's like an old trading vessel. It can be really different. And I think one of the big important things is to bring the story of those wrecks to the surface. So that's what Bard of Honor's goal is to take. We concentrate quite a lot on First and Second World War wrecks because there's a lot of them in the Gulf of Finland. And going down and documenting these wrecks and bringing back the story to the surface of those people that are not lucky enough to be able to go down and see these. But we also have information from them. So there's a wooden wreck that we've been working on that is from the 17th century. It's complete, sitting on the bottom. We know the build date because we found the carving of the build date. We don't know the name because they didn't inscribe the names. But we took samples from the hold, and from those samples, doing the genetics, it was grain, and doing the genetics on the grain that we took from the hold, we can trace where the ship would have been, and then we can link that, and the historians can then actually start looking at trade pathways and trade routes. We can take samples from the wood, and we can work out where the wood came from dendro samples, and then we can trace where the wood trade may have been in that region. There's actually one project in Sweden, which is the Gripshunden wreck, and Brendan Foley, who's the lead professor on it, has been working on this wreck. They've been doing excavations, and the story that's gone from the wreck is not just about the wreck anymore. It's about an entire period of time in this part of the world and what was going on. They found spices on that wreck that come from islands in Indonesia. They found grain on it that comes from other parts of Europe. They found silver on it that comes from a mint that was mined in another part. So it shows an entire snapshot of the trade going on at that time. All this from one wreck site. Now, not every wreck site's like this, don't get me wrong, but the stories you can get from it are, the linking of a snapshot of what's going on at that period. But you can also tell stuff about the state of climate and things like that from some of the wood as well, because it's been so, especially in the Baltic, it's been so well preserved that they can actually do measurements on the ring widths and relate it back to what may have been happening at that time. I think so.
Nice. Yeah, I think also like wrecks from the historical perspective, super interesting, but also from the perspective of that they have been there for a very long time, and they were witness of what happened also underwater, of climate changes, of different things that were going on underwater. And maybe you could find out by taking samples how it looked like, I don't know, 300 years ago, the water. I think it's very, as you just say, a time capsule for humans, but as such, the wreck is also a time capsule, right? Because it evolved, there is succession happening, so very interesting. We have a question from Greg from Scotland. He's asking, do you have any advice for someone looking to start dipping their toe into scientific diving, but work a non-diving related full-time job? So not able to commit masses of time.
Okay, yeah. Hello, Greg. Thanks for your question. So depending on your interest in whichever field, whether it be archaeological or biological or geological, there's lots of citizen science related projects that need divers to go out and assist. The UK has a large number of these organizations where divers that can go out and do some very basic training, short term, maybe a week, 2 weeks. Like we offer the same sort of courses. We have a 1 week training course that's the basic scientific diver, and then we have a 1 week training course which is like an archaeological diver as well. And then they can go and get involved with volunteer projects and develop their experience and use their diving skills to then contribute to a larger picture. So instead of actually driving the research question themselves, they're contributing to a larger scale project by gathering data, by maybe moving samples, by assisting, etc. And it's a very good way of getting involved with that. And I mean, depending on your interest, there's the National Archaeological Society have a couple of courses in the UK that are dedicated to that. There's Sea Search, Fish Base, and things like that. If you're looking at the biological side, there's the Seagrass Project. So yeah, there's a lot of options down that route. I think Healthy Seas with the ghost diving, for example, and that wing of their division as well. That was also a very another way you can also go down. It's not really scientific diving per se, but it's related to the whole sort of conservation drive aspect of it.
Yeah, I think afterwards we can maybe put a comment on this comment with some links, also from your side, Ed, to help Greg in his path. But I think there is a lot of opportunities and citizen science projects where a diver can jump in. the time is running. I just saw it's already 7:42. So I would like to close down with my last question, which is, sorry, Ed, again, a broad one. And the question is, if you would have a wish for science and for the field of science, of marine science, which would that be?
As in where I would like to see it go, or
Exactly.
I'd like to see it for more funding, really. I'd like to see governments and institutions realize that actually without a functional science, we can't understand what's going on in the system, and then without understanding what's going on in the system, we can't address issues and we can't develop new knowledge. So I would say, in a very broad answer to a very broad question, is I think more interest and more funding opportunities for especially marine science, which is ironic because earlier I was talking about we're in this sort of new age of it, but it's been taken on by private organizations that just identified that our actual government organizations are not focusing on it in the way they should. And
one step before would be for people, for politics to understand why science is important, right?
Yeah, I mean, we need to understand what's going on, whether we want to repair the damage that we've done, or whether we want to find out what's happening in the system so we can understand it more to make. You can't make policy without knowledge, and you can't get the knowledge of what's going on in the system without using the scientific method. And so therefore you've got to start right back. And that sort of goes full circle to scientific diving as a tool. It's not the only tool. It's just a tool that scientists can use to address the research questions that they have. Same as someone in a genetics lab is doing some sort of work, someone that's doing work in a microscopy lab, and histology is doing another. It's just another tool that's available to research, and the specialist people that know how to do it. They can help people train, or they can support the science, or they can do the research themselves if they've already got it. And that's kind of, I think, the full circle sort of loop. We need to understand, we need to know what's going on. To do that, we need to do science, and to do the science, we have to have people that are trained to do it on all levels, whether it's the principal investigators and the professors asking the sort of driving questions, or whether it's facilitators like myself, or whether it's research like students or undergraduates who are coming in and assisting from the other end. And it's sort of, that's kind of the way it goes, I think.
Nice. I like this answer. In the end, it wasn't so broad. So I would like to close down. We will save this live stream on all channels, and you can also still ask questions. As I said, we will post the links to the citizen science projects under the post. And also I will again post the podcast episode with Ed under the post. So if you haven't had a listen, do that, because it's very interesting. And thank you, Ed. It was a pleasure talking with you.
Yeah, thank you very much. And thanks to everyone that decided to come out to have a listen, whether it's morning or evening, wherever you are. So, yeah. Thanks very much.
Thanks. Have a nice evening, morning, afternoon. Ciao.
Bye.